Do your mindset and attitude matter? Undoubtedly. But it's not the only thing that matters. In fact, a theme we'll return to again and again in this book is that at the end of the day, there's only one thing that truly crosses you over from the land of potential and into the land of the actual action. In this chapter, we'll look closely at the background on which the drama of procrastination plays out, the immediate moment. Of course, we know procrastination is the devil on our shoulders that suggests we'll be totally fine if we push what we should do until another moment, then another, and then a few more, after the next 4. You get the idea. You've been there before, in that moment, facing down the choice to run away or to knuckle down and act right now. No matter how motivated you might have felt before, crunch time arrives and the rubber hits the road. In this chapter, we'll look at ways to deal with procrastination, not from a distance, but staring at it head on in the moment. What is it that makes us want to say, I'll get to it later, in the hopes that it will disappear forever? Whatever it is, this chapter is aimed at just getting started as a way to break inertia. The 40-70 rule. Let's begin with something you might find a little counterintuitive. Can you actually be too prepared? Is this causing you to procrastinate? Former U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell has a rule of thumb about coming to a point of action. He says that any time you face a hard choice, you should have no less than 40% and no more than 70% of the information you need to make that decision. In that range, you have enough information to make an informed choice, but not so much intelligence that you lose your resolve and simply stay abreast of the situation. If you have less than 40% of the information you need, you're essentially shooting from the hip. You don't know quite enough to move forward and will probably make a lot of mistakes. Conversely, if you chase down more data until you get more than 70% of what you need, and it's unlikely that you'll truly need anything above this level, you could get overwhelmed and uncertain. The opportunity may have passed you by, and someone else may have beaten you by starting already. This is the zone of procrastination. You want 100% information, and although it's never possible, it's a zone of safety. But in that sweet spot between 40 and 70%, you have enough to go on and let your intuition guide your decisions. In the context of Colin Powell, this is where effective leaders are made. The people who have instincts that point in the right direction are who will lead their organizations to success. This is also where you should battle procrastination before it becomes too late. You should feel a certain amount of uncertainty or even lack of confidence. It's natural, and anything else is an unrealistic expectation. More often than not, what you're searching for will only be gained through beginning. We can replace the word information with other motivators. 40 to 70% of experience, 40 to 70% reading or learning, 40 to 70% confidence, or 40 to 70% of planning. While we're taking action, we learn, gain confidence, and gain momentum. When you try to achieve more than 70% information or confidence, experience, etc., your lack of speed can destroy your momentum or stem your interest, effectively meaning nothing's going to happen. There's a high likelihood of gaining nothing further from surpassing this threshold. For example, let's say you're opening up a cocktail bar, which involves buying a lot of different types of liquor. You're going to wait until you're 100% ready with your liquor before opening. You can't expect to have absolutely all the liquor you will ever need when the doors are ready to open. It's impossible to be able to serve any drink that a customer orders. So applying this rule, you'd wait until you had at least 40% of your available inventory prepared. This would establish momentum. Then, if you could get more than half of what you need, you'd be in pretty good shape to open. You might not be able to make absolutely every drink in the bartender's guide, but you'll have enough on hand to cover the staple drinks with a couple of variations. If you have around 50 to 60% inventory, you're more than ready. When the remaining inventory arrives, you'll already be in action and can just incorporate that new inventory into your offerings. If you waited until you had 70% or more inventory, you could find yourself stuck in neutral for longer than you wanted to be. This way of thinking leads to more action than not. It constantly reminds you of what's ultimately important: acting. Waiting until you have 40% of what you need to make a move isn't a way of staying inside your comfort zone. You're actively planning what you need to do to get out, which is just fine, as long as it's not over-planning. Banish excuses. As we've seen, people use excuses to postpone taking action and to procrastinate. Most excuses, however, are poppycock, invalid, rubbish, and rationalized. Excuses are our subconscious protecting us from our fears. It's your automatic pilot saying, "Danger, this will not go well, let me save you." And the solution that pilot offers is always to avoid action. That's all it comes down to. Some part of you is choosing procrastination because on some level, you believe it is an effective strategy to achieving your goals. And that goal is often to stay safe and comfortable. Let's look at some common excuses people use to procrastinate. Now is not the right time. We saw this in the previous chapter, and it's worth repeating since it's probably one of the most common. Related variations: I can't do X until... I can't do X unless... True, there is never a perfect time for anything. There are mediocre times and terrible times, but rarely are there perfect times. Stop putting conditions around your ability to work. All you're doing is creating a psychological gatekeeper for yourself that is detrimental. Timing is everything. That's actually not true. Timing just is. There's no good time for a crisis, but they happen anyway. When trying to be productive, rarely is there an obvious time that is better than another. It's just a lie we tell ourselves. There are always going to be obstacles to overcome and hassles to manage. In fact, 99% of the time you want to do something, the timing will be mediocre. 1% of the timing will be truly terrible, and that's it. There should never be any expectations of having perfect timing. When is the right time to travel? When's the right time to get married? When's the right time to have a child? When is the right time to quit? You know the answer to these questions. For instance, there is never a perfect time to sell a house. The housing market is unpredictable, and various rates are subject to change overnight. You also don't know what bids you'll receive, and if anyone will even view your home. On the other hand, there are some objectively horrible times to sell a house, like when a main employer in town lays off 50% of its workforce, and interest rates take a 10% rise. Many of us wish timing was something we had more control over, but the fact remains that we rarely get to choose when something happens to us. We do, however, get to choose when we take action. If you find yourself questioning this, the time to act has already arrived. I don't know where to start. You do. The problem is that you think you need an entire plan before starting. People need to stop expecting to see a clear path through to the end before they even begin. Here's the secret. You don't need to know where you'll finish in order to start. The number one college major for students entering university in the U.S. is undecided. Most 18-year-olds are not able to articulate what they want to study that will lead to a lifelong career. However, we encourage young people to get to college soon after high school. Don't wait too long. Don't get too many responsibilities. During the 4 or 5 years they're on campus, most students declare a major and start working toward a degree that will eventually lead to employment. We think nothing of this process. However, so many times in adulthood, people become paralyzed because they don't see a clear finish line. Doing something today with what you have today is the key. Stop researching, stop agonizing, stop wasting time, and start doing. Do what you can right now at this very moment, and you can figure out the next steps after. You probably know your next steps. however small they may be. The blank page or the blank screen is the writer's nightmare. It doesn't matter if the writer is a middle schooler with a book report due, or Stephen King. The blank page is terrifying. And yet, all who eventually produced something to fill that paper or screen had to stop reading the book, stop researching the topic, stop planning out the flow, and just start writing. The first words written may not be any good. They may be terrible and need to be changed, but the writer cannot get there if they never write any words down. The way to start writing is simple. Start writing. Focusing on the end product, a hardback with a glassy cover, isn't the goal at the beginning. A beginning is the goal. After you start, the rest will take care of itself, because you'll know what needs to be done to get you to the next step, and then the one after that. I'm not good enough. Shockingly, that just might be true. A person may really want to do something, but they might not be good enough. What's the answer to that dilemma? You can become good enough. Sometimes the only way to get what you want is to shift into a growth mindset and start working. Make sure that this time next year, you know more than you know now, and that your skills are better than they are now. If you're willing to take the first steps, what you need will follow. When you feel like you're not good enough, you might need to reframe it just a bit to, I'm not good enough at this moment. After all, why should anyone have the expectation that they would be good enough at something without practice, work, and a significant amount of time? You simply cannot have the expectation of instant or even preemptive excellence. If you never start, you'll never be good enough, and you will have prophesied your own future. Learning a musical instrument is an illustrative example. When people say they aren't musical before picking up an instrument, it makes little sense, doesn't it? If learning to play the piano is your goal, then you can certainly make it happen. You would have to start at that beginning middle C, but with lessons, practice, patience, and perseverance, anyone, including you, can learn to play the piano. Who knows? Perhaps you could eventually become a keyboard player for a Queen cover band. Just because you're not good enough now does not mean you cannot become good enough eventually. Combating excuses is difficult because of our overwhelming need for self-protection. We may not even realize when we're using defense mechanisms to procrastinate, but chances are, if you find yourself justifying a lack of action, it's a defense mechanism. Better productivity simply means removing that barrier to action. Parkinson's Law. Parkinson's Law states that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. Whatever deadline you give yourself, big or small, that's how long you'll take to complete the work. If you give yourself a relaxed deadline, you avoid being disciplined. If you give yourself a tight deadline, you can draw on your self-discipline. So, this principle can be used in good or bad ways. Bureaucrat Cyril Parkinson observed that as bureaucracies expanded, their efficiency decreased instead of increased. The more space and time people were given, the more they took, something that he realized was applicable to a wide range of other circumstances. The general form of the law became that increasing the size of something decreases its efficiency. As it relates to focus and time, Parkinson found that simple tasks would be made increasingly more complex in order to fill the time allotted to their completion. Decreasing the available time for completing a task caused that task to become simpler and easier and completed in a timelier fashion. Building on Parkinson's Law, a study of college students found that those who imposed strict deadlines on themselves for completing assignments consistently performed better than those who gave themselves an excessive amount of time and those who set no limits at all. Why? The artificial limitations they had set for their work caused them to be far more efficient than their counterparts. They didn't spend a lot of time worrying about the assignments because they didn't give themselves the time to indulge. They got to work, finished the projects, and moved on. They also didn't have time to ruminate on what ultimately didn't matter, a very common type of subtle procrastination. They were able to subconsciously focus on only the elements that mattered to completing the assignment. Very few people are ever going to require you or even ask you to work less. So if you want to be more productive and efficient, you'll have to avoid falling victim to Parkinson's law by applying artificial limitations on the time you give yourself to complete tasks. By simply giving yourself time limits and deadlines for your work, you force yourself to focus on the crucial elements of the task. You don't make things more complex or difficult than they need to be just to fill the time. For example, say that your supervisor gives you a spreadsheet and asks you to make a few charts from it by the end of the week. The task might take an hour, but after looking over the spreadsheet, you notice that it's disorganized and difficult to read, so you start editing it. This takes an entire week, but the charts you were supposed to generate would only have taken an hour. If you'd been given the deadline of one day, you would have simply focused on the charts and ignored everything that wasn't important. When we're given the space, as Parkinson's law dictates, we expand our work to fill the time. Set aggressive deadlines so that you're actually challenging yourself on a consistent basis, and you'll avoid this pitfall. A distant deadline also typically means a sustained level of background stress. Push yourself to finish early and free your mind. Save your time by giving yourself less time. This has been Focus Master, 37 Tips to Stay Present, Ignore Distractions, and Finish the Task at Hand. Written by Nick Trenton, narrated by Russell Newton. Copyright 2021 by Nick Trenton. Production copyright by Nick Trenton.